Hey guys. So far, everything we've looked at in this unit has been one trait coded by one gene. But what about traits that are coded by multiple genes? That's what we're going to take a look at in lesson 6.6, polygenic inheritance. All right. So polygenic inheritance is just easily defined as a single trait that is controlled by two or more genes. Now, the vast majority of our traits in reality are polygenic in nature. Okay. Polygenic inheritance leads to our huge amount of genetic diversity. And most of the traits we observe really are polygenic in nature. Now, within the polygenic traits, they can exhibit codominance, they can exhibit incomplete dominance, or they can exhibit classic Mendelian genetics. Okay. And that's fine. It's just that truthfully, there are very few traits that are really coded by only one gene. So, good examples of polygenetic inheritance in humans are things like our skin color. There are many different varieties of skin color, even though they're the same set of genes, lots of genes are coding for that. Our hair color, our height, our build, and even our eye color are all polygenic. And so it's difficult to talk about a human trait with classic Mendelian genetics truly because there are only about 8 or 9 different human traits coded by only one gene. So let's take a look at how polygenetic inheritance works and how it sort of gives us our gradient of different features. So the gradient of skin tones, the gradient of heights amongst humans, and things of that nature. All right. The word polygenic inheritance sounds fancy, but it's just Greek. Poly means many, and genic means genes. So it just means many genes. All right. So we're going to take a look at a make believe plant. Now, in college, I actually did a real genetic study on plants. And it's amazing how accurate we could be at predicting the heights of plants and how we could get a nice spectrum of different heights. So, anyway, here is our make believe plant. And we're going to determine how tall that plant gets based on its genotype. In other words, its genes determine how tall the plant's going to get. And there are two different genes that control for that. In my example here, both of our genes are going to exhibit incomplete dominance. Okay, so there is a base height gene that codes for the overall height of the plant. So just basically, how tall is this plant going to be? Okay. And we're going to use the following. We're going to say a tall plant is going to be 10 inches as a base height. And its genotype, we're going to use T for base or H for base height, is going to be big H, big H. A medium plant will grow to be 6 inches as a phenotype, and it will have the heterozygous trait, big H, little h. And then the short plant at 2 inches will have the homozygous recessive trait of little h, little h. So, based on just this genotype, we have 3 different heights of plants 2, 6, and 10 inches. Now, there's another gene that plants inherit called the growth factor gene, which is a hormone that causes the plants to grow certain amounts. Okay. And this is also an incomplete dominant trait. So, the phenotype we have will be major growth. Now, if you inherit the major growth phenotype, you're going to add 4 inches to one of these base heights over here. So a plant with a major growth genotype of big G could be, if it inherits tall, could be 14 inches, 10 inches at medium, and 6 inches at short. But if it's heterozygous for that genotype, it's going to have minor growth. It's only going to add 2 inches, big G, little g. So we could get a 12-inch plant, an 8-inch plant, or a 4-inch plant. And then there is weak growth for the totally homozygous recessive trait, little g, and it's only going to give a 1-inch bonus, so to speak, to the plants. So 11, 7, and 3-inch plants. All right. So we are going to cross 2 8-inch plants. The way to produce an 8-inch plant is to be totally homozygous. Okay. So for an 8-inch plant, big H, little h is going to give us the genotype of 6 inches. Big G, little g is going to give us a bonus of 2 inches. So the 6 plus 8 or 6 plus 2 is 8. So this is going to really need a dihybrid cross. So what we want to do is figure out what kind of sperm and eggs, or in the case of plants, pollen and ovules could this genotype produce? So these plants can, using the FOIL method and the distributive property, first, outer, inner, last, can make big H, big G. Okay. They could make alleles or gametes with big H, little g, outer. They could make little h, little g, inner. And they could make little h, little g, last. Okay. So there are 4 possible gametes. A reminder, there's always got to be one of each letter in our gametes. Okay. Now let's populate our dihybrid cross with these guys and see what we get. So here is our dihybrid cross. We're going to put our pollen along the top, our gametes. Okay. And we'll take our ovules or our eggs from our plants and put them along the side here. And at this point, we should be pretty well versed at using Punnett squares, right? But this pollen fertilizes this ovule, making a big H, big H, big G, big G. So how tall? What would the phenotype for that plant with that genotype be? Well, big H is 10 inches. Big G is an additional 4. So that is a 14-inch plant. How about this next one right here? Big H, big G, little g. Well, this is 10 inches, and this is plus 2, so this is a 12-inch plant. So we have a 14, and we have a 12. What about this guy? Big H, little h is a 6-inch plant. Big G is an additional 4 inches, so that's a 10-inch plant. And how about this guy right here? Well, that's just like the parents. That's going to be an 8-inch plant. And so we can do this for each one. We can find that this one and this one are the same. Those are the 12-inch plants, right? This right here, how about this one? This is 10 inches plus 1 inch. That's an 11-inch plant. So we can see that there are loads of different phenotypes that are produced this way. So you complete this with me or on your own, which I actually recommend. Take a look at that for a moment and see if you can figure out how tall everything is. Our shortest plant is going to be this one down here. So it's possible to take 2 8-inch plants and make a plant that is only 3 inches, right? Little h is 2 inches. Little g is an additional 1, so 3-inch plants. So here's the spectrum of possible outcomes from the cross of 2 8-inch plants. Now, I could give you the ratios here, but we've got way more phenotypes in polygenic inheritance than we saw when we did just dihybrid crosses with 2 traits. So the more traits we add to polygenic inheritance, or the more genes we add, the wider the list of possible outcomes begins or becomes. Okay. So from 2 8-inch plants being crossed, we can produce 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, and 14-inch plants. If we added more genes to it, we would have even more diversity from there. All right, guys, that's polygenic inheritance. I've got a fun lab for you where we're going to take a look at polygenic inheritance with hair color.